Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am very excited and thrilled to have this discussion today. My name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the GM of AI and Cyber, and I'm joined by Whit Walters, the field CTO and category lead at GigaOm. The title and focus today is going to be something very different than what you're used to. And the title of that webinar is Your Backups Know Something You Don't. We're going to have a conversation that is completely different from what you're used to when it comes to backup infrastructure and recovery. Now, many of you are still joining. You're probably getting a cup of coffee. I know it's a little early. So one thing I'll mention here is a couple of housekeeping items. The session is going to be recorded. You will have access to the deck. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. Whit and I will be sure to take a look at that throughout the session. We will either answer it live in the chat. If we are bombarded with questions, we will make sure to personally email you with an answer as well. So with that, I'm thrilled to get started on this discussion today. For the agenda, we're going to go through a very quick introduction. We're going to dive right into Whit's background, his experience. I'm super excited to have this conversation with him. He's very uniquely qualified to discuss some of the pains, the insights, the challenges that CIOs and CTOs face today. But we're also going to talk about how the world is changing every single day, very drastically, very dynamically, and what that means, especially for organizations within IT and CIOs in the mid-market. We're going to talk about how backups have been a completely dormant goldmine for your organization and what it means to be able to unlock those insights. And we are going to introduce for the first time, all of you will be the first to see this, what HYCU Air AI Resilience is all about. And of course, we're going to go into a Q&A section. But for those who are thinking about, first time you're interacting with HYCU, you're probably thinking, is it an acronym? How do I spell it? How does it sound? It's HYCU. It stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. But of course, we always like to mimic the simplicity of the Japanese poem structure as well. We are trusted by thousands of organizations worldwide to protect the crown jewels of their environment. Data is sitting heterogeneously everywhere all at once. You need a data protection vendor that can help you protect it, recover it, regardless of where it is. That's been our entire focus here at HYCU. It's what we focus on, and making sure that you have somebody that you can depend on to make sure that your data is available, resilient, recoverable, and compliant. But what I'm really excited about is to have this discussion with you, Whit. As we get started, why don't maybe you give a bit of an intro to yourself and your background to the audience?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Whit Walters. I'm one of the field CTOs for GigaOm. And part of my background is I started off in data and then got into analytics and then got into AI back when Watson became kind of the cool thing in town. And then from there, I've also been CTO of a couple of mid-market startups. So this is great kind of timing for, hey, I've done some of these things and had to figure it out in terms of how do I manage my data? Where does it live? How do I back everything up? And then because I've been, from a startup's CTO's perspective, I've had to wear a lot of hats. And so Andy and I are going to talk about why the CTO at a mid-market startup doesn't have a huge budget, doesn't have all the things that he needs, and why HYCU is probably one of the better solutions out there for somebody in this space.
Perfect. Now, Whit, one of the things that I want to talk about here is things have changed so drastically in the last 15 years. And I'm not just talking about AI and everything that we're seeing in the last 3 years, but I'm specifically talking about how data infrastructure and its location is completely changed, right? We go back 20 years, your VP of IT, your CIO, whether you're a healthcare company, a financial services company, an ISV, and you have 1,000, 2,000 employees, life was a little bit more manageable back then. Why? You were the king or queen of a castle, and that castle was your data center. All of your systems of record, your applications, everything lived and was hosted by you. Your Git repo, your knowledge base, your document management systems, everything lived in that castle. Now, of course, you had to maintain availability, resilience, you had to do everything because you were self-hosting. But all of a sudden, what we've seen is at first a very slow evolution and then a very drastic evolution in technology stacks, right? So you go back 10 years ago, Whit, and you started to really see the first enterprise adoption of SaaS, right? Whether it was Salesforce, Microsoft 365, that's when people really started to migrate at least some of these systems of record to as a service. What we then saw, especially around COVID time, was a drastic acceptance and maturity of cloud infrastructure where at first people were using it from an economics perspective for storage, for archiving, but as those services matured, as the economics started to work for customers, people started to not only lift and shift but actually modernize. And so, even 2, 3 years ago, it was already a very drastically different environment where your organization is probably already using multiple clouds, regardless of the size of your organization. You are
Absolutely.
using dozens of SaaS applications. Now, Whit, from your perspective, you've probably seen this evolution in many different ways. What's been your perspective, even before we touch on AI? Just the transition from self-hosted to as a service is already pretty drastic.
It really was. So back in the day, I would have to do what I call Black Friday sizing. I would have to go out, I'd have to figure out how big of a server did I need? And then realizing that from Black Friday to sometime in January, I was going to be maxing that server out, and the rest of the year I'd be running it at about 10%. So I had to figure out kind of what my sizing was. And then when the cloud came along, I realized that, hey, instead of buying a couple of servers for backup, having to buy two, over provision them, I could buy exactly what I needed to the cloud. So we started that migration off. And then slowly over the years, and then all of a sudden, all at once, we really saw everybody moving all of their infrastructure from on-prem or in my data center into the cloud. And then AWS is the 800-pound gorilla in the room because they were the first to market and they really went out ahead of everybody else. Um, Azure and GCP then caught up, and now GCP is starting to move ahead in certain types of workloads, and they've gotten really good at that. But I started my career in IBM, and IBM hasn't kept up with this as much, so it's been interesting to watch. But really, what we're seeing is it made financial sense for a CTO to start moving everything up to the cloud because it was easier to manage, easier to provision, or it seemed easier. And then once you moved up there, your data gravity kicked in. And you really had to think about, well, where can I move things and how can I manage workloads? And then when SaaS came along, it became so much easier to start using the applications as I needed them. Instead of having to buy big expensive licenses, I just bought them by the drink instead. So the financial models of everything that we were doing as a business have really started to evolve into the modern stack that we're starting to see today.
No, absolutely. And I think the net difference now, if you just do like a 15-year side by side comparison, is everything was in a monolith, uniform protection, uniform security, uniform recovery. All of a sudden, everything is going to be completely in a different place, in a different location, in a different format. And so already there were many, many challenges with organizations to make sure that they were resilient, protected, and recoverable. And that's not even touching on where we are today with from an AI perspective. I think no one is allowed to have a conversation without mentioning AI, but it's very real because the adoption that we're seeing is critical. And it's not just about co-pilots. It's not just about folks building out their own agents, whether folks building out their own pipelines. But what we're seeing is every single organization, from public sector to healthcare to financial services, is very seriously and drastically adopting AI. Well, in the last 2, 3 years, you've been in this world very deeply. What's been your perspective?
So when I first started writing machine learning models, they were pretty clunky and they were slow and they were hugely expensive. And we were building TensorFlow or other types of frameworks to try to figure out recommender systems, vision models, doing things and building those out. And it took those engineering and your machine learning teams months, if not years, and 90% of those projects never made it to production. Now, with the rise in LLM and AI, it's now a commodity as opposed to I need a team to build out a specialized system. One of the things that's really changed, even really within the last 2 years, was just the availability of what I can do with the model. I no longer need a team of PhDs to be able to help me build the models and deploy them, and then a whole team to be able to do the serving and the inference and all of that. Now I can now use that and plug into some of these foundation models, or I can use some cheaper models based on what's the cost and the pricing and the types of workloads. So this has been a real game changer from all the way back in the day with Watson, where it was really hard and clunky to use, to now with these frontier models where they're easy to use and they're absolutely amazing. And then weekly, we're seeing new things coming out, and we're seeing the models starting to flip in terms of this week, Gemini is the best, and next week, Anthropic will be the best, and then the next week, and then some of the new models coming out of China. But that also brings up some other good things in terms of when I built them myself, I knew exactly who had access to the data and what they were doing to now I feel like there's some issues that I need around the governance and control of those models and how do we manage them.
No, absolutely. And what I've noticed too, it's not just about the teams that are already responsible for building systems, but it's every single contributor in the organization is interacting with AI as well. And what
Absolutely.
we've
Yeah.
noticed, is that especially in development teams, with your background as well as a CTO, we're noticing, especially as we have conversations with our customers, where the playground for agentic deployment and for co-pilots and for the use and proliferation of AI is on those as a service applications. And of course, as trends change and as technologies shift, those same as a service application, the Salesforces of the world, the GitHubs, the Atlassians, they don't call themselves a SaaS application anymore, do they? They are AI platforms. And I know, for example, we also saw announcements from Salesforce on Headless 360. And essentially, these SaaS applications become, and your systems of record become databases for workflows and for agents to be built on top of them. But what it means is it's the new playground for AI. It's not your file shares. It's not your virtual machines. It's your SaaS applications that are the ones that are getting the most exposed. They're essentially at the we can call it the frontier of this, where they're actually being the ones tested the most. Wait, from your perspective, especially running engineering teams, how have you observed things changing?
Oh, Andy, that's a great point. So from running engineering teams, you used to have to find the best talent you could afford when you're building this out. And often that was really constrained in terms of where was I? And I was always located in and around Boulder, Colorado, which is a great area for you can find lots of engineers and some really great talent to be able to do things. But in other markets, you didn't always have that. So, but in running engineering teams, what we're finding is these AI agents really accelerate them, but it also brings up some new challenges because you have to watch the models, you have to guard them, you have to make sure that they have the right provisioning and that they have the right access. And you need some auditability because you don't always know what the agent is going to do. Back in the day when the engineering teams would work, I knew that my senior devs were watching the junior devs and off they'd go. Now, who's kind of watching the watchers? We need to make sure that, hey, we're watching the behaviors of these agents, especially when you're running SaaS applications, because these applications and these agents are not deterministic like we would write software back in the day. Now we're seeing a probabilistic model and hopefully it hallucinates in the right direction that you're actually using. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's just you need to be aware of it. And as we go forward, there are a lot of guardrails that we're looking at being able to put around these things to make sure that they work the way we expect them to.
And what I've noticed too in our customer conversations is, you know, every single one of these developers is supercharged with AI. They are
Mhm.
giving an agent the same permissions. And what we're noticing are two things: the change rate, the amount of lines of code, the change rate that's happening in an organization is increased by an order of magnitude. So it's making, things like GitHub or whatever, if you're using another Git repo, so critical because you have this continuously high rate of evolving IP that needs to be protected. But as you know, just with regular developers without the right guardrails, even human developers are going to make mistakes. And we've seen that in the past. Agents will do the same, whether misinterpreting instructions, guardrails are drifting. The whole point is that, the world of IT still didn't master the ability to protect as a service applications. And now you're adding AI to each of these applications because every major system of record has its own copilot. Atlassian has Rovo, Salesforce has Agentforce. You have non-technical folks also interacting with these agents as well. And so what you're going to see is, before organizations started to really think, okay, I need to protect these as a service applications. I know that they're responsible for the system, but I'm responsible for the data. Now with pilots, with agent workflows, they don't have a choice. Now, the reason we're bringing that up is you and I before this conversation we're talking about how quickly everything's changing. And there's no scenario where we do not continue on this path. So the conversation that we're having is not doom and gloom. It's how do you equip your organization to be protected, to understand what's happening, and to be recoverable. But most importantly, understand what could go wrong so that it doesn't. And with the way I sometimes would describe this very simply, especially to folks maybe outside of IT, is these agents are incredible. You can do some very incredible things, and they do those things at machine speed. But if they misinterpret you, if there is any change in the configuration, then you can also delete and lose your data at machine speed or expose your data at machine speed. As you're talking to a CIO of a mid-market, whether they're, thousand employee healthcare company or financial services, what's some of your perspective or guidance as they inevitably enter this world where we're all learning, we're all starting to see very different changes, and by the time that we learn it, there's a new technology out there. Like maybe what's some feedback or guidance on these CEOs dealing with this change rate?
Sure. So I just kind of remind them from our perspective that if you've ever had a brilliant new grad working for you, they don't always know the rules of the road. They don't know the rules of engagement. And if you over provision their abilities, they're going to make mistakes just because they don't know or they haven't learned. So with AI, we're doing that. But as Andy said, and as you said so well, really, we're doing this at machine speed. We're not doing it at human speed. And this can be happening at 2 in the morning when nobody's paying attention, but your agents are still on. So it's keeping those same guardrails. Nothing really changed. It's just now you've got a very eager person who wants to help you, but you need to make sure that they have the right permissions, that they can't access and delete the databases or your backups, and being able to make sure that you've got them well governed and well provisioned. And again, it's that best practices. Again, I don't see this slowing down anytime soon, but maybe we do take a step back and go, okay, we're going to be using this tool. Let's make sure we use it safely and effectively so that we don't have these oops moments.
And what I'll mention too here is that if an organization didn't have the right data posture
Hmm.
before the implementation of AI, they definitely don't have the right data posture now. So there's still fundamentals that need to be followed. And we'll talk a little bit about those fundamentals, especially around backup and recovery, DR, and everything that organizations need. But what I want to talk about is how difficult this is specifically for mid-market CIOs, right? So I'm, whether your organization has 500 employees, 5,000 employees, you have a very different challenge and dynamic than a CIO of a Fortune 100 company. Why? Because they have unlimited budget to not only continue surfacing and protecting their infrastructure. They have an AI separate allocated budget. They have a war chest of people, tools, and resources to go and solve these problems. But the mid-market CIO has to keep the lights on, probably is not getting a larger budget, has to help facilitate and many times lead AI initiatives, and also has to make sure that the organization is protected, secure, and recoverable. And the reason I bring this challenge up is, going back, every single CIO is dealing with a heterogeneous environment, unless you are in a federal black site. So there is some form of data center footprint still, right? It wasn't that people fully left to public cloud. It was that they either lifted and shifted some workloads, like you mentioned what you did with, but many folks that we talk about still have some form of virtual machine footprint on-prem. Most people we speak to have two clouds. Most people we speak to have dozens, if not hundreds, of SaaS applications like Jira, Confluence, GitHub, ServiceNow, all of these other applications,
Yep.
and all of the AI solutions and tooling that sit on top of those applications. And then if you as a CIO are facilitating the build of AI pipelines within your organization. This is a lot
Right.
of diversity in both risk and technology that CIOs are facing. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because for a mid-market, so growing, a small startup to a mid-market size, you watch your team, you watch everything grow, you're maintaining that, and you're watching your footprint go from something small and manageable to you're trying to spin 100 plates and you're trying to keep track of them. You don't have the budget, you don't always have the resources, but you still have the board pressures to be able to grow and expand, and then the business pressure to be able to make sure you maintain it, but you don't always have the budgetary leeway to hire the best and brightest, or because they're hired by the big enterprises, like you said, Andy, but you're getting as good as you can get. So what you need to be able to do is find the smart things, do it the right way, and kind of watch your budget and maintain that so you can actually start to use these tools and use them effectively and kind of manage everything that you have to do.
No, absolutely. And that perspective is so important. Because what we'll notice too is I call it the big gap. And what I mean by that is whether you're mid-market enterprise, you have a EDR, you have a SIEM, you have identities, you have backup and
Hmm.
recovery, right? These things cover the core pillars, the fundamentals of the NIST framework and everything that organizations have. But there's a massive gap in understanding what is happening inside of that, what I call as a service data, whether that's Microsoft 365, whether that's Salesforce, whether that's even new apps that you're adopting like Notion. And that big gap is usually what organizations try to fill with data security posture management solutions. Now, there, of course, there's many names for it. There's DSPM, SSPM, AISPM is what people are calling it. And there's so many other different tools to understand my identity posture, to understand sensitive data classification. There's so many questions that need to be answered. And for a Fortune 500 organization, what do? They go and procure a tool for every one of those insights because they can afford it. They can afford to have somebody manage the deployment, and they have the budget to do so. But what we've noticed in the mid-market, whether that's even 500 to 5,000 employees, you have Microsoft Purview. So you have a decent understanding of some of the questions around, what is happening? How are users interacting within Microsoft? Are people exporting things? What kind of data and classifiers do I have in here? But you don't have those capabilities in the rest of those applications. You don't have them in GitHub. You don't have them in Confluence. So there's some very, very basic questions that I would challenge anybody in the audience to try to answer without the tools that will cost them a lot of money. And when we're talking about the economics here, Whit, we're not talking about a small contract. For a mid-market organization to procure, whether it's a DSPM solution or adjacents, these are six figures, if not more. Sometimes their entire IT budget in many cases. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
the goal here is, there's very specific questions that are very expensive to answer for CIOs. Do I have sensitive data in Salesforce? Is it in Confluence? Is there somebody who's been exporting a ton of data, a bunch of files in Box? I'm managing entry ID in Okta. Have I had any drift in my configurations? What has this person done in the last 7 days? These are very, very big questions that are very expensive to answer. And the thing that I wanted to flare up with here was, as a data protection company, we've been sitting on an incredible amount of value within backup data, right? When you think about what's in a backup, a lot of people, when they think backup, they think about their virtual machine backup. They have a 3-2-1 rule. They keep it offsite. They have their incrementals. But in the world of cloud and as a service, backups have an incredible amount of data inside of them. Let's take an example like GitHub. When HYCU backs up GitHub, you're not just backing up your metadata. You're not just backing up your activity logs. You're backing up everything by the way, at a very high frequency. You're observing changes behind that. And so when we think back for organizations, you have a lot of questions that go unanswered. You have a lot of requirements and budget requirements to be able to even answer those questions. But some of the answers have been sitting in this backup data. But the challenge is with that everyone's been kind of using backup and recovery as a life insurance, right? You dust it off. We had an operational recovery scenario, maybe something more serious, and now we need to recover. But just take a step back and even think about some of the things that you as a CIO are backing up today, whether that's Salesforce or Confluence. You have a historical data set that is immutable, that is complete, and that is sitting off-site. And you are using it simply to be able to recover that data. So, when we talk through, because this is a very non-conventional discussion now, because we're talking about backup infrastructure that people just associate with recovery, I would challenge everyone to rethink. If you were to back up all of your SaaS applications, you would be able to see how every file was touched, how it changed, who changed it, the permissions that were changed, the records, that were modified, the configurations that were adjusted, because all of that is available through APIs. And all of that is required to back up and recover that data. And so the challenge that I would put forward to the audience is, take a step back and think about if you could talk to your backups in plain English, if you could ask them any questions, whether it's your backups in one application or across the board, what would you want to ask them? If you could treat them as a genie, what would you want to ask them? Whether that is a specific deletion or a configuration change, that is something that, in the chat, feel free to add. But, Whit, before I kind of dive in deeper, any thoughts on how to leverage a lot of these existing assets where people just have an association with, well, I use that to recover. I need to go find tools to understand what's happening. What's been your perspective?
Yeah, and Andy, I like the way you're framing this because back in the day when we started doing data warehousing, right, we would take backups and we would try to put them into the data warehouse, or you would ETL things over. And then you were trying to figure out, okay, what's in my operations data? How do I kind of get reports on it? And we started to figure that out, and it made kind of sense. And then we built data lakes and we did all the other things that now we have, some of the modern analytics stack. But when we're backing up the databases, that thing just sat there. What do I do with it? When we backed up applications, when we backed up these other things. But now I really like where this is going because now I can start to ask those kinds of questions about the metadata, the behavioral data, and that I don't always have access or the ability to be able to do in a production environment because it's really kind of clunky to ask those types of analytics questions about behavior patterns and starting to look at those things, especially in a highly regulated industry. And I've worked both in healthcare, so I've got PII and PHI, and I'm trying to make sure that nothing's leaking because that gets very expensive very quickly. And it's never just one record. It's always hundreds of thousands. One is manageable. Hundreds of thousands is going to break your company, and the investors are going to bail, and then you're also going to get, huge fines. And I've also worked in fintech and finserv, and those are highly regulated industries because any of that data that gets out, again, that can make or break you. So now I'm also looking at that, but I'm also looking at behavior because as a regulated company, I'm having to go back to the auditors and be able to show who touched what data when. And I try to make sure that I've got all of that metadata management so I can see the behavior. But you can't always see, sometimes you're just only accessing your database or your application or your SaaS apps. But now I can start to look at everything across my estate as opposed to one stack at a time. Now I can start to make better questions across behavior, across applications, and across my estate and my tech stack. That's kind of a game changer in terms of what I can do with that information that I couldn't do before because I just couldn't see it. And now it sounds like we can.
Absolutely, Whit. And I think what I want to emphasize here is the challenge. As a CIO, there is an incredible amount of questions that people cannot answer without very, very significant budget investments.
Mm-hmm.
They've been sitting on assets that are completely unused and completely reactionary. And they have the ability, with the right approach, if everything is formatted the right way, if it's in the same control plane, to be able to ask questions of those backups. And I don't mean just in the dev test world from the past, but also specifically to tooling and behavioral analysis that you've mentioned too, Whit. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how this would work. Let's say that your organization starts to back up Confluence. And if you're not using Confluence, you're using some other knowledge-based vendor, whether that's Notion or so many other companies, doesn't matter. Assume that you are protecting that, whether it's HYCU or any other vendor, and assume that you know that there is a high risk, which there always is, that there's PCI and PHI. What I'm sure you had to lecture your developers about API keys and what they're storing in their repos, and it's the same thing across organizations. Imagine being able to remove that fear and that veil of, well, I can't afford to answer that question, and being able to say, well, let's search by backups. Let's go in Confluence. Let's go identify there's a social security number or any form of PHI or PCI classifier. Most organizations we deal with, they're managing tons of identities. They're managing your customer identities. You're managing your workforce identities, probably using Entra, Okta together. And of course, you have identity management within the applications themselves. I guarantee you in your organization at some point in time or even live, you have some form of drift. And it's easy to manage drift when you have one IDP provider. But when you have multiple, it can be very difficult. Imagine if you can go and understand and protect each of these IDPs and then understand how they've changed. Why? Because you have a backup and a snapshot of the logs, the metadata, and the configurations of these IDPs. And then you can ask it or ask using AI, be able to understand what has changed within this organization. And one that I want to mention that's very critical too is all the time we have organizations and CIOs telling us that they're spending so much time on, for example, offboarding procedures, or they're getting a knock on the door from HR and they're being asked to go and understand what this person has done in the last 30 days for whatever reason, right? There's always a Murphy's Law behind these things. If you have backups of all of this, you have the context of what this person has done, not just in the security of, hey, Jimmy has deleted 30 things today. You should go check that out. But hey, this is Jimmy's history with this application. And this is what Jimmy has done. And this is the baseline. And so, when you start to understand what's inside of those backups, you start to really understand the potential of that data that's essentially been sitting dormant. And if you're able to use all of that data, you're able to then say, I have this thing that I considered life insurance, and now it's healthcare for my organization because the majority of the tools out there for me to answer these questions are completely cost prohibitive. But the answers have been in there. And what I want to mention too here, Whit, is the reason we're having this discussion today and what we're unveiling in the next few minutes is only possible because of the coverage that HYCU has. And for many of you who might be joining a little late, our platform has over 100 workloads that we're able to protect. Not just your critical infrastructure, your multi-cloud infrastructure, but most importantly in today's conversation, your SaaS applications. Whether any single Git repository, any knowledge management system, any ticketing system, any IDP, you have the ability to back up and recover them with HYCU. Now, Whit, 3 years ago, the reason this was so important was because organizations had no options. The mainstream backup market gave you backup for Salesforce, Microsoft 365, and Google Workspace. That was it. And the challenge was at that point in time was whether it's a compliance, a recovery issue, an availability issue, I need to have offsite copies and I need to be able to recover from those offsite copies. But today, there's also a knowledge issue, which is I don't know what's in those applications. I don't know what's changing in those applications, and I definitely don't know how it's changing when I'm adding copilots and machine speed operations to them as well. But where we sit here today is sitting on the largest context pool in data protection, and now having the ability to be able to search, understand, and have conversations with that backup data. And what I'm super proud, and I'm going to show you in a demo, is what customers are going to be able to start using here called HYCU Air. And it stands for AI resilience. And at the end of the day, what we're going to show you is the ability to have a conversation with your backups. Not just, hey, when's the last time that you took a backup and kind of these operational things, meaning true conversations and investigations to understand what's going inside one, two, or all applications at once. Wait, do you want to see a demo?
I would love to see the demo, Andy. This looks exciting.
Perfect. Let me show you and let me share my screen. Wait, do you see my screen?
I do.
Perfect. Now, I'm going to walk you through kind of the day in the life of a HYCU customer who's protecting 20, 25 different SaaS applications with us. And that's kind of, standard norm these days. Now, imagine first within this experience that you are already protecting these applications with HYCU. And you essentially have a backup pool of one single application or many applications that you can search on. And you can start to think through very, very specific insights. And we talked about kind of a behavioral insight, which was there's a specific person, or I think there's a specific issue, and I want to know what's happened, and I want to know, and I want to have a baseline to what that person's done. Usually, you would have to go and procure very, very specific tools, whether that's a UEBA, UBA tools, to be able to understand that. But imagine being able to kind of summon the insights via your backup data. So wait, I'm going to give you an example of how this works. And who knows what this guy has been deleting?
He looks a little shady to me. So let's
A
see what he
little
said.
shady. A little shady, but assume that your organization is able to leverage the backup data across everything that you're backing up with HYCU, essentially assign an agent to it, but doing everything in natural language and being able to say, well, what has this character done? What has he changed? What has he deleted? And really start to double down on that investigation. One thing that I want to mention with is in the mid-market firm, if you had to do an investigation like this, what do? You go, you collect logs, you put the information together, you spend days, weeks. We've spoken to so many people who are spending way too much time doing so.
You know, when I was running a FinServ bank, we had to do these kinds of things because we had to look for, internal actors. Are they do they have access to data that they shouldn't have? If they did they send it home? Have they sent it through their email? What have they done with this data? And it always took us a long time because you have to look through so many different vectors to be able to find that. So it's not just one investigation we would have to do. We had to figure out all the things that they could touch and then try to figure out where the data was stored, where those logs were, where all that parts were, and then trying to come up with that investigative process was always difficult because when it's manual, you don't know if you're missing something, and you try to figure it out as best you can.
100%. And when you're wearing many hats, that is a very, very difficult thing to spend your time on. And imagine being able to go through your backups, receive a summary to understand, well, what has this person done? Is there a high risk of this? Should I continue trying to understand this person's behavior? But it's not just about deletions, right? Where every single application has a unique behavior. You might be worried about somebody exporting a ton of files in Box, or somebody who's personally cloning a bunch of repos. Like there's so many different
Mhm.
ways to understand what people are doing with their data, where security tools are not going to pick up on that context sometimes. But being able to see and investigate what your backups are doing across the application, understand how people are being
Absolutely.
benchmarked, right? Is this person doing something that is normal for them? How are they? What's their change rate versus their peers? What's their change rate versus their department? But most importantly, if they have gone and they have deleted and they have modified a ton of data, do I have the ability to go and recover those objects, whether it's a repo or a space or a ticket or an attachment? What is my recovery posture? And that's a lot of the times what's missing, where folks are buying tons of tools that are very expensive, that are telling you what's happening in certain areas, but they're not giving you the ability to essentially truly remediate and recover that information.
And then those tools were fragmented. And again, this is something that we look at on the radar as we're looking at either a platform play or a feature play. So when I buy a feature play, I'm looking at buying a whole bunch of tools together and I'm stacking them together. That can get really expensive. Or I can try to buy a platform that's going to give me a broad set of tools that are going to give me the ability to do the things that I need. And when I'm putting my CIO hat on, I'm looking at, hey, the fewer vendors I can get in my stack, the fewer licenses, the fewer overhead, it's going to make it my job much, much easier to manage all of that, either that application stack, because I've got to train somebody to be able to do all those things, or I have to do it myself. And again, having this kind of broad platform really allows me to then be able to breathe and have some time back and also know kind of where my security and what that posture is and be able to figure out what's going on in my data.
100% win. And what I've shown you is one insight. I'm going to show you another insight, but I'm going to show you how customers are going to be able to generate their own insights as well. And I'm going to give you another example, because you mentioned this very specifically in your experience in healthcare. Most mid-market organizations are going to be concerned about what kind of PHI or PCI is in their organizations, in their applications that are outside of the purview of Microsoft, pun intended. And many of the times what we've noticed is organizations saying, hey, I don't really have a good way to know, for example, what's in my Salesforce records or in Confluence, especially things that they're very attachment heavy, or people can use these applications as workspaces. But imagine being able to ask your backups that question. Imagine asking your backups to flag all PCI in Confluence.
Right? Did somebody write a draft, put a record out there, put an attachment in that either has PCI um, data, so it's got some kind of financial, or it's got PII, PHI that shouldn't be there at all? And why did it get there? And how do you find it? And how do you either clean it up, or how do you make sure that it doesn't leak?
And to solve that problem, it is a very expensive problem where organizations and tools are designing for the Fortune 500. But being able to leverage your backup assets to flag, especially using metadata, what have we found? Is there a risk? And do you want to go and then scan those backups, specifically those applications that we have flagged? And so the point here is these are a few of the insights that customers
Mhm.
are going to be able to leverage. These are a few of the insights that we know for a fact people are going to want to know. There are so many things that we can discuss today. If you're backing up Entra and Okta ID, you're going to be able to see kind of your identity posture and what's changing between those identities and how does that relate to a specific person? And can you then go and search on that person? But we would spend hours and hours going through these use cases with. But what I want to kind of finish here with you on this discussion and this demo is we have bona fide use cases and insights that customers are going to be able to learn from and they're going to be able to leverage. But the next 100, the next 200, the next 1,000 insights are going to be unlimited and customers are going to have their own boutique way of trying to learn this, right? Because when you're putting natural language and you're leveraging LLMs and SLMs on top of all of your backup data, can you imagine what you can learn? Whether you're backing up Workday or Slack or Confluence or GitHub, there are so many, let's call them boutique use cases that are so specific to you or somebody else's company. And so you as a customer will be able to also create your own template across specific data insights. You can build your own rules, you can build your own reports, and you can start to craft your world with backup data and be able to understand insights that only your organization needs, but using and reusing assets essentially that you've already paid for. So a few things that I wanted to share as I reshare my screen here is that what we're really excited about HYCU Air is not only how we're changing the ROI and the value, but the majority of the customers that we're talking to do not have the budget, the time, and the resource to go and solve for every net new insight that they can't answer today. And being able to use that backup data, being able to assign an agent, being able to learn from it is what's most important and what we're super, super excited with HYCU Air. Now,
Yeah.
what I want to stress here is the value of this is not simply being able to search on your backups. The value of this is being able to search on a platform that allows you to back up so many applications that most people don't back up. But I've been very excited for this conversation. I'm very excited to be debuting this to our customers and to any organization who's interested in solving this problem. If somebody's interested in using this, you can join the waitlist. You will be able to be added to this program. We will get your feedback. You'll be able to use it. You'll be able to test it. You'll be able to start learning from your backups. But, I think this marks a very, very different dynamic and expectation in data protection, where today, as you know, how AI providers themselves are always looking for more data sets to learn from, every organization is sitting on a gold mine that's been completely dormant. And this is our approach and our focus to empower these customers, especially because they have so many unique challenges. To be able to reuse these assets, we believe is going to fundamentally change how they interact with their data and their backups.
Yeah. Andy, as somebody who's worked in some of the businesses that this is specifically targeted for, what's exciting for me as I look forward is this learns about my business. This learns about what I do and understands this, where in the past I've had to use the tools the way the tools were designed, not necessarily for my business, just as they're trying to figure out what that customer looks like and that they target that market. And sometimes I had use cases that were outside of what that tool did. With this, the adaptability of being able to use an LLM to search and understand and then give me feedback is unprecedented in terms of the things that I can do as somebody who's had to kind of manage the budget and the processes for business. So this is really exciting for going forward and the things it's going to be able to do to really enable businesses to really understand, especially the technical leaders in the business, in terms of what's really going on and being able to use those backups that were just sitting there and untapped. And I didn't even know that I didn't know. I just figured that they were there. I used them if I need them. Now there's something that I can actually query and actually do something with. So this is really exciting as we look forward with this.
No, I really appreciate that feedback, Whit. I think you've been in those shoes before and you understand the multitasking, the prohibitive kind of dynamic of some of the tools out there, and being able to reuse these assets are critical. We're
Hmm.
very excited about this. We've had a couple questions around how do I get started. If you scan the QR code, we're also posting a link on the chat here for you to be able to access. Join the waitlist. We'll jump on a call. We'll understand what do you want to learn from? What are the applications that you can start protecting with HYCU and start learning? One thing that I want to mention is this market of, everyone is having an AI conversation with. If you were
Hmm.
not protecting your data in the right way and you had no control of it even before you were leveraging even Gen AI or full agentic deployments, your organization's posture is not what it should be. And so there's
Yep.
still, we talk about all of these very nuanced and cutting edge technologies that everyone's adopting, but there are fundamental best practices to follow to be safe. And being able to start with backup data is a very, very critical starting point. But wait, I wanted
Absolutely.
to thank you for your time, your insights, and your experience. For the audience, thank you so much. This is a pretty pivotal moment in the industry, and we're super excited for you to get your hands on it. Any questions, please reach out to us. But I wanted to thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks for having me. And I would look forward to seeing where Haiku goes with this. This should be fun to watch.
Thanks, but talk soon.